I found a hidden camera in my Airbnb. The host had been trafficking renters' personal data to scam networks for years. Imagine this. You book a cute little Airbnb for a weekend trip. Cozy place, good reviews, reasonable price. You check in, you unpack, you relax. It's just a rental. Nothing to think twice about. Then, on the second night, you notice something. A smoke detector that's angled slightly wrong. A tiny reflection where there shouldn't be one. You look closer. It's not a smoke detector. It's a camera. Live. Recording. And it's been running since before you even arrived. You start looking around the rest of the unit, and you find more. Hidden in a phone charger. Hidden in a bookshelf clock. Hidden in the bathroom vent fan. Your stomach drops. And then you start asking, how long has this been happening? To how many people and why? What this person discovered wasn't just a creepy landlord with a camera fetish. It was something much bigger, much more calculated. An operation. A business. Built on stealing the private information of everyone who ever stayed in that unit. This is a story about privacy, trust, and how far someone will go when they realize your personal data is worth more to them than your comfort or your safety. Okay, before I read this full story, let me give you some context. This is from our legal advice in our scams. Cross-posted after it blew up because of how methodical the whole operation turned out to be. This story covers discovering hidden surveillance in a short-term rental, the investigation that followed, what the host was actually doing with the footage and data, how law enforcement got involved, the scale of the operation once it was exposed, what happened to the other victims, how platforms like Airbnb responded, what changed for the renter afterward, practical lessons for anyone who rents short-term stays. I want to be upfront about something. This story does not include any graphic content. Nobody is physically harmed. This is about data theft, financial scams, and privacy violation, not violence. It's a mystery meets true crime story about how ordinary information, stolen quietly, can be turned into a criminal operation worth real money. By the end, you're going to understand exactly how these scams work, how to protect yourself, and why one Reddit post turned into an actual federal case. Let's get into it. I'm 29 years old. Last spring, I booked a weekend trip to a coastal town about 4 hours from where I live. I wanted a quiet getaway, just me, a good book, and some time away from my apartment. I found a listing on Airbnb, a converted guest cottage behind a bigger house, run by a host named, I'll call him Daniel. 400 plus reviews, all 5 stars, super clean photos, fast responses. Everything about the listing screamed trustworthy. I checked in on a Friday afternoon. The place was exactly as advertised, small, tidy, tastefully decorated. There was a little welcome basket with local snacks and a handwritten note that said, "Enjoy your stay. Let me know if you need anything." It felt personal. It felt like Daniel actually cared about the guest experience. I spent Friday night just relaxing. Ordered takeout, watched a movie on my laptop, went to bed early. Saturday, I went out exploring the town. Beach, a few shops, a nice dinner. Came back around 9 p.m., tired and ready to relax. That's when I noticed it. I was propping my phone up on the bookshelf to charge it. And as I moved a decorative clock out of the way, I noticed the clock's face wasn't quite flush with the frame. There was a tiny gap. And behind that gap, I could see something small and dark. A lens. I froze. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe it was just a broken clock. But something about the way the lens caught the light didn't sit right with me. I picked up the clock and turned it over. There, embedded in the back, was a small pinhole camera. Wired. Active. A tiny red light blinked. Almost invisible unless you were looking directly at it. My hands started shaking. I set the clock down very carefully, like it might notice I'd found it. This is the moment that changes everything. Up until this point, it's just a nice weekend trip. And then, in a split second, the entire experience gets recontextualized. Every private moment in that unit, now you have to wonder who saw it. I immediately grabbed my phone and started looking around the rest of the cottage, more carefully. Not panicking yet, trying to stay calm, trying to think clearly. I checked the smoke detector in the bedroom. Sure enough, same tiny lens tucked into the housing, angled toward the bed. I checked the bathroom. There was a small vent fan above the mirror. When I looked closely, there was a lens embedded in the grill, angled to capture the sink and mirror area. 3 cameras. In a unit I'd been staying in for 2 nights. Showering in, changing clothes in, sleeping in. If you found even one hidden camera in a place you were staying, what would you do first? Confront the host? Call the police? Just leave? My first instinct was to leave immediately. But then I thought, if I just leave, I have no proof. Daniel could remove the cameras before anyone investigates, and it would just be my word against his. So I did something that, looking back, I'm proud of. I documented everything. I took photos of each camera in place from multiple angles, showing exactly where they were hidden and what they could see. I filmed a video walking through the unit, narrating what I was finding and why. I made sure to timestamp everything. Then I packed my things quickly but carefully and left the unit. I didn't confront Daniel in person. I didn't want to tip him off or put myself in a vulnerable position alone with someone who'd clearly been secretly filming me. I drove to a coffee shop in town, sat down, and started researching what to do. First, I reported it to Airbnb through their app, including the photos and video. Airbnb has a strict no hidden camera policy. Especially in bedrooms and bathrooms, it's one of their most serious violations. Second, I called the local police non-emergency line and explained the situation. They took it seriously right away and said an officer would meet me to take a statement. Third, I started looking up Daniel's other reviews. 400 plus 5-star reviews. Hundreds of people who had stayed in that same unit or possibly other units. He managed with no idea what was happening. That's when the scale of this started to sink in. This wasn't a one-time thing. This was a system. I met with a police officer that evening. I showed her the photos and video. She said this matched a pattern they'd seen reported in a couple of other short-term rental cases in the region. Hidden cameras used not just for voyeurism, but for something more calculated, gathering personal information. I said, "What do you mean personal information?" She explained, in addition to capturing video, some of these operations were designed to catch guests using laptops, entering passwords, viewing personal documents, or leaving IDs and other sensitive items in view of the camera. That footage could then be used for identity theft, blackmail, or resold to scam networks that specialize in exploiting exactly that kind of information. I felt sick. I thought about every time I'd opened my banking app in that cottage, every time I'd typed a password, every private phone call I'd made assuming I was alone. Think about what you do in private in a rental banking, work emails, personal calls. How would you feel knowing someone had access to all of it? Over the next few weeks, I stayed in contact with the detective assigned to the case. I'll call her Detective Reyes. She told me that once they got a warrant and searched Daniel's properties, it turned out he managed 3 separate short-term rental units. Not just the one I stayed in, they found a much bigger operation than anyone expected. In a locked closet at his primary residence, they found a small server setup, multiple hard drives, software specifically designed to flag video footage where a laptop screen, ID card, or handwritten document was visible and readable. In other words, this wasn't just passive recording. It was an active system built to extract usable personal data from guest footage automatically. Detective Reyes explained that once flagged, certain clips or screenshots were being sold in batches to online forums that traffic in stolen personal information. Names, addresses, partial financial info, even employer details gathered from things like laptop screens or documents left out. That information gets used for things like identity theft, targeted phishing scams, selling verified identity packages to other criminals. In some cases, blackmail, if anything more personal, was caught on camera. I asked how many people. She paused before answering. Based on what we've found so far, bookings going back almost 4 years. Across 3 properties, we're looking at potentially several hundred guests. Several hundred people who thought they were just staying somewhere nice for a weekend. This is what makes this story different from a simple creep with a camera story. This was a business. Systematized, automated, and running for years before anyone caught it. Detective Reyes also told me something that made my blood run cold. Daniel had 5-star reviews, specifically because he was so responsive and thoughtful as a host. He'd check in with guests, ask if they needed anything, seemed genuinely warm and hospitable. That warmth wasn't fake exactly, it served a purpose. A relaxed, comfortable guest is a guest who lets their guard down, who leaves their laptop open, who doesn't think twice about typing a password in view of a smoke detector. The friendliness was part of the operation. Does it change how you feel about the story? Knowing the host's kindness was strategic rather than genuine? About 6 weeks after I filed my report, Detective Reyes called and said the case was moving to a formal charge, and that Airbnb had also permanently removed Daniel's account and all his listings. She also asked if I'd be willing to speak with a couple of other former guests who had come forward once word started spreading locally that police were investigating a host in the area. I agreed. Over a video call, I talked to 2 other people who'd stayed in Daniel's properties in the past 2 years. One woman told me she'd had several $1,000s stolen from her bank account about a month after her stay. She'd assumed it was a random hack, and she'd never connected it to the Airbnb. Now looking back, she remembered doing online banking on her laptop in the living room, right in view of what she now realized was probably a camera disguised as a router light. Another guest, a man in his 40s, said he'd started receiving incredibly convincing phishing emails a few weeks after his stay, emails that referenced real details about his job and his address that a random scammer shouldn't have known. At the time, he just assumed it was a coincidence or a data breach somewhere else. Now it made horrible sense. Neither of them had known to check for cameras. Neither of them had any reason to suspect their weekend rental was the source of the problem. I started thinking about how normalized it's become to just trust these listings. Good reviews, professional photos, a responsive host, we take all of that as proof of safety. But none of it actually verifies what's happening inside the walls when no one's looking. I decided to post about it not for attention, but because I wanted other renters to know what to look for. I posted photos of exactly where the cameras were hidden with permission from the detective. Since the case against Daniel was already moving forward, and it wouldn't compromise anything, that post is the one that ended up going viral. Within a week, over a dozen more former guests reached out, some who'd stayed at Daniel's properties, and some who'd found similar setups in completely unrelated rentals in other states. It turned out this wasn't just Daniel acting alone. He was connected to a small network of other hosts who used similar setups and sold information through the same online channels. If you found out a host you'd rented from was doing this, would you want to know even years later, or would you rather not know? The case against Daniel eventually became a federal matter because the data theft crossed state lines and involved wire fraud, selling stolen information across networks that operated in multiple states. He was charged with several counts: illegal surveillance, wire fraud, and trafficking in stolen personal information. Because it became a federal case, it took a long time, almost a year and a half, before anything was resolved. During that time, I had to give a formal deposition. I had to describe in detail what I found and how I found it. It was uncomfortable reliving it. But I also felt like it mattered, like my documentation from that very first night was actually going to help hold him accountable. Eventually, Daniel took a plea deal. He pled guilty to several of the charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. He received several years in federal prison, plus a large restitution order that was supposed to be distributed among identified victims. I say supposed to be because that's the frustrating part. Investigators believed there were likely hundreds of victims, based on the volume of footage and data recovered, but only a fraction of them were ever formally identified and notified, because so many stays happened years earlier and records had gaps. The restitution amount, split among identified victims, wasn't life-changing money. For me, it covered the cost of a new laptop, a credit monitoring service, and not much else. This is a hard truth about these kinds of cases. Even when someone is caught, even when there's a conviction, full justice for every victim is basically impossible. The scale of digital crimes like this outpaces what the legal system is built to fully address. What did help, though, was that his properties were permanently banned from every major rental platform. His name and business were flagged, and the case became a reference point that platforms used to update their host verification policies. Airbnb specifically cited this case anonymized when they rolled out stricter camera disclosure requirements and began doing more proactive sweeps for repeat offender host patterns. So even though individual restitution was limited, the case did lead to systemic change, which honestly felt more meaningful to me than the money. Do you think platforms like Airbnb do enough to protect renters? What should change? It's been almost 2 years since that weekend trip. I still travel. I still use short-term rentals sometimes, though I'm far more careful now. I sweep every rental I stay in, checking smoke detectors, clocks, outlets, router lights, anything with a lens-sized opening. I use an RF detector app on my phone that can pick up on wireless camera signals. I never do sensitive tasks like banking or entering passwords unless I'm confident the space is clear. And even then, I'm careful about screen angles. It sounds paranoid typing it out, but it's become second nature. The same way people check locks on hotel room doors or use the peephole before opening up. What changed the most, though, isn't just my travel habits. It's my sense of what privacy actually means in a world where so much of our lives are documents. Our passwords, our faces exist in digital form that can be captured, copied, and sold without us ever knowing. I used to think of privacy violations as something dramatic and obvious. Someone breaks into your house. Someone steals your wallet. This was neither of those things. It was quiet. It was patient. It ran in the background of an otherwise pleasant weekend. For years, undetected until one slightly crooked clock gave it away. I've also become someone people reach out to. After my post went viral, I started getting messages from people all over the world, some who found cameras in their own rentals. After reading my post and knowing what to look for, some who just wanted to say thank you for raising awareness, some who'd experienced identity theft and wondered for the first time if it might be connected to a stay they'd almost forgotten about. I can't fix what happened to any of them, but I can tell them, document everything. Report it immediately and don't assume you're the only one. Has this story changed how you'll approach your next short-term rental stay? What sticks with me most about this whole experience is how much we outsource our sense of safety to systems that aren't actually designed to guarantee it. A 5-star rating, a verified badge, a responsive, friendly host. These are signals, not guarantees. They tell you what other people experienced, not what's actually happening behind the walls. I don't say that to make anyone afraid to travel or rent short-term stays. I still do it. Most hosts are exactly who they say they are, running a legitimate, honest business. The vast majority of stays are completely fine, but I've learned that a healthy amount of vigilance isn't paranoia. It's just being realistic about how much of modern life runs on trust systems that can be gamed by someone patient and organized enough. Daniel wasn't sloppy. He wasn't some obvious creep you'd clock from a mile away. He was thoughtful, responsive, and ran a 5-star operation for years specifically because it worked. The mask was the business model. I also think about the people who never find out. The guests whose footage was flagged, whose information was sold, who had money stolen or their identity used somewhere. Down the line, and they never made the connection back to a weekend trip they took years ago. They're still out there. Statistically, some of the people watching this video right now have probably stayed somewhere similar and never known. That's not meant to scare you. It's meant to make the case for a 5-minute sweep of any rental you stay in. It costs you nothing, and it might save you from becoming someone else's business model. What's one thing from this story you're going to actually do differently next time you travel? So that's the story, and what makes it stick with me is that it started with something so small a clock that wasn't quite flush against the wall and unraveled into a years-long operation that affected hundreds of people. This wasn't a story about violence. Nobody got physically hurt. But privacy, once violated, is hard to fully repair, and the financial and emotional fallout from stolen personal information can follow people for years. Before you go, here's a quick, practical checklist for your next short-term rental. Check smoke detectors, clocks, outlets, and router-style devices for pinhole lenses. Use an RF hidden camera detector app. Several free ones exist. Avoid entering sensitive information banking, passwords in common areas until you've checked the space. If you find something, don't confront the host alone. Document everything and leave, then report it. Report to the platform and local law enforcement. I want to ask you, have you ever swept a rental for cameras? Would you know what to look for if you needed to? Drop a comment and let me know. And if this story made you want to double-check your next Airbnb, that's exactly the point. Thanks for watching. If you found this story useful, hit like and subscribe. I cover more true stories like this every week. I'll see you in the next one.